You ever felt like the air in the room just shifted because someone silently decided you don't belong? Not in some dramatic explosion, not with slamming doors or screaming matches, but with silence, with absence, with 1,000 tiny cuts you don't notice until you're bleeding. That was my family reunion this past June, out in Bloomington, Indiana, where the cornfields roll longer than the patience of most of my relatives. We had burgers on the grill. The adults clutched their iced teas and opinions, and the kids were running barefoot in the grass like a goddamn Norman Rockwell painting, except I wasn't really in the picture. Literally. I mean, I was there. I showed up, wore my nice jeans, brought my infamous bourbon pecan pie that everybody pretends they didn't devour the last 3 reunions, and I even smiled through the small talk. Sat through the prayer circle where Uncle Gary thanked God for the strength of traditional family values, and I didn't even roll my eyes, which should have earned me a damn medal. I played the part. I laughed when I was supposed to laugh. But there was this moment during the group photo. Someone shouted, "Okay, everyone get in. Let's get one with the whole family." I stepped in, dead center, next to my cousin Caleb, who smelled like weed and cheap cologne. We posed. We smiled. Click. Then we took a bunch more, siblings only, cousins only, all the ladies, all the grandkids, and of course, the obligatory, just the married couples where I faded off to the sidelines like I always did. It was fine. I didn't even mind. Until 3 days later when the photos started popping up on Facebook under albums titled Reunion 2025, Blessed Beyond Measure, and Family is Everything. But here's the twist. I wasn't in a single one. Not one. They'd either cropped me out or chosen different shots where I just happened to be out of frame. And not by accident. We're talking visible Photoshop borders, weird cuts where someone's arm is dangling in midair, like they edited me out with a butter knife and no shame. In the main group photo, the one that went mildly viral in our town for how all-American it looked, there was an awkward gap where I'd stood. Like a ghost had been scrubbed clean. At first, I thought maybe it was a fluke. Maybe the photo they posted wasn't the one I was in. Maybe they just picked the shot where everyone looked their best and I, for some reason, was blinking or sneezing or scratching my ass. But then I scrolled deeper. Aunt Carol posted 27 photos. Not in one. Uncle Gary had a slideshow video with Bible verses and a Lee Greenwood soundtrack, nothing. Cousin Rachel even uploaded a selfie video from the moment we posed and said, "Okay, got everyone?" "Yup, perfect." Right before cropping the actual photo like I didn't exist. I mean, Jesus Christ. And I know how this sounds. I know. I can already hear the whispers. Maybe it was just an oversight or you're being sensitive again, like they've said since I was 11 and told them I didn't want to shoot deer with Grandpa. But let me ask you something. How many times does it have to happen before it stops being an accident and starts becoming a message? What kills me is they didn't even try to hide it. No texts, no messages, no "Hey Dylan, sorry the photos didn't include you, that was weird, right?" Nothing. It was like the silence was part of the punishment. Like they wanted me to see it and sit with it. That kind of cruelty isn't loud. It's cold, sterile, calculated. It's the same look my mom gave me when I brought my ex-girlfriend, Jordan, to Thanksgiving 2 years ago and introduced her like I was asking permission to breathe. That night, I sat on my couch with my laptop open, scrolling and scrolling, refreshing the album like maybe I missed myself. I opened an old photo from college, one where I had long hair and dumb glasses, standing in front of the same barn from this year's reunion. I was there. I was smiling. I existed. Something about the contrast hit me so hard, I had to put the laptop down and just sit. Now look, I'm not perfect. I can be sarcastic. I don't go to church. I live alone, and yeah, I never settled down and had kids like they all wanted me to. But I send birthday cards. I help clean up after reunions. I'm not estranged or some family pariah. I just never fit in. And maybe that was the real sin. The next morning, I sent a message to Rachel. Just a simple, "Hey, kinda noticed I'm not in any of the pics. Everything okay?" It was read immediately. No reply. No dots typing. Nothing. I waited 2 days. Then I followed up. Seriously. What's the deal? Still nothing. It felt like I'd shouted into a canyon, and the only echo I got back was my own damn disappointment. That was when something started burning under my skin. Not rage. Not even sadness. It was something deeper, more dangerous, clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally understand you've been holding your breath for 20 years, trying not to upset anyone, trying to be invisible in just the right way so they'd maybe forget to hate you. And it still wasn't enough. So I poured myself a bourbon, sat down with a napkin and a Sharpie, and scribbled 4 words. They don't see me. Then I added 4 more, but the world will. And somewhere between the second sip and the third, I thought, what if they couldn't crop me out? What if they had to look? Because sometimes, when your own blood won't claim you, you have to make a scene loud enough for strangers to hear. And I was just getting started. There's a special kind of silence that follows being ignored, not the quiet that settles in after a fight or the peace that comes from understanding, but the hollow, echoing silence that lets you know someone made the decision to shut a door in your face and never look back. That's what I felt staring at my phone for 2 full days after I messaged Rachel. I could see the little scene timestamp right under my question, just glowing there like a scar. And nothing else. No dots. No typing. No response. It was like she'd looked at my words and decided I wasn't worth the effort of a reply, like somehow I was the one making things difficult by noticing I'd been cut from every single family photo, like a wart nobody wanted to admit was theirs. At first, I tried to rationalize it, like we always do when people we love decide to play dumb. Maybe she was busy. Maybe her kids had the flu or her phone died or some other convenient fiction I could feed myself to soften the punch. But when I saw her posting new photos from the reunion every damn day, throwback to last weekend, love my tribe, blessed to have this family, with every single one edited like a surgeon had carefully removed me, I stopped trying to convince myself it was anything but intentional. You don't accidentally erase someone this thoroughly unless you want them gone. I told my therapist about it the following Thursday, during our usual session in that little sunlit office with the peeling bookshelf and the overly enthusiastic motivational posters. Her name's Jen, mid-40s, calm voice, the kind of person who makes you feel like you're allowed to fall apart in front of her. I laid it all out, every cropped photo, every ignored message, the eerie silence, and she didn't blink. Just sipped her tea and asked, "What does this remind you of?" And that's when something cracked open in my chest. Because the truth was, this didn't start at the reunion. Not really. This had been going on my whole damn life, just in smaller, more socially acceptable doses. I'd always been the one asked to take the picture, not be in it. I was the cousin who got Christmas cards a month late with no handwritten note, the one whose birthday was so close to the holidays that nobody really made a fuss. I was the kid who stayed quiet at dinner when the grown-ups talked politics or religion, the one who got polite nods but never real questions about his life. I was there, but not seen. And when you live long enough like that, you start to believe maybe you're supposed to disappear. I remember being 15 and overhearing my Aunt Carol whisper to my mom, "Well, he's a little different, isn't he?" Like I was some kind of problem to be solved or a story they didn't know how to tell. And I never forgot the way my mom didn't correct her, just kind of nodded, like she agreed, like she'd been waiting for someone else to say it out loud so she wouldn't have to. So when Rachel didn't reply, it wasn't just a digital snub. It was another chapter in the same book. A book where I was always the footnote, never the story. And I knew right then that if I kept swallowing this kind of rejection, it was going to rot me from the inside out. I commented on one of the reunion photos, just to test the waters. The one where everyone was lined up in front of the barn, arms around each other, grinning like a stock photo for wholesome Americana. My comment was simple, "Guess I was never really there, huh?" Within 10 minutes, my Aunt Carol had replied with a single praying hands emoji. Like that was enough. Like some vague spiritual platitude could patch over being erased. Uncle Gary DM'd me privately and wrote, "You always take things so personally, Dylan. You need to relax." I stared at that message for a long time, stunned at the audacity. Not even an apology, just another reminder that I was the problem for noticing I'd been shoved out of the family scrapbook. Have you ever had someone gaslight you so thoroughly that you start to question the very ground you're standing on? Like maybe you are overreacting. Maybe you are too sensitive. But then you remember the facts, undeniable, hard as stone. You were in the photo. You did show up. You were right there. And they made you vanish. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my couch in the dark, the TV flickering some true crime nonsense in the background, and I kept thinking, why the hell do I keep showing up for people who would rather crop me out than confront me? What was I still trying to prove? That I'm good enough? That I deserve a place at the table? And what kind of place is it, really, if you have to beg for it? Around 2 in the morning, I found myself scrolling through Instagram, and I stumbled across this post from some artist in Brooklyn. It was a neon sign installation that read, "You don't have to be what they made you." And something inside me snapped into place. That was the moment the idea started to take shape. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. It was more like a flicker, a whisper in the back of my mind that kept getting louder every time I saw another blessed family bullshit photo pop up. I thought, what if I made them look? What if, for once in my life, I took up space they couldn't crop me out of? What if I became so visible that even strangers would ask questions? I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew it had to be bold. Public. Loud. Because I was done playing the polite, well-behaved outlier. I'd been ghosted by blood, but I wasn't going to haunt the background anymore. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that whatever came next, it was going to leave a mark they couldn't erase. It started as a joke, one of those wild, half-angry, half-sarcastic fantasies you have while brushing your teeth at midnight and talking to the mirror like it's your last real friend in the world. I muttered it without thinking, just loud enough to hear myself say it out loud. Hell, maybe I'll just put my damn face on a billboard, see if they can crop that out. And instead of laughing at the absurdity, instead of shaking it off like a fleeting burst of spite, I stopped, toothbrush still in my mouth, and thought, wait, what if I actually did? There's a fine line between losing it and finally standing up for yourself, and honestly, I was done caring which side I fell on. People talk about rock bottom like it's this dramatic moment of total collapse, but sometimes it's quieter, pettier, like realizing your family pretended you weren't at the one event you actually showed up for. And when the people who raised you would rather Photoshop you out of their narrative than face you as you are, what's left to lose? The next morning, I called out of work, tossed on a hoodie, and drove downtown with nothing but caffeine, rage, and a half-baked plan. I found this local ad agency I remembered from a radio jingle, creative ideas, local impact, tucked between a vape shop and a payday loan place, which felt about right. I didn't even know what I was going to say when I walked in. The receptionist looked up, gave me the usual forced smile, and asked if I had an appointment. No, I said, but I think I've got something you'll want to hear. They paired me with a woman named Maya, maybe late 30s, sharp glasses, sharper attitude, and a kind of tired confidence like she'd seen enough dumb ideas to know when someone was either full of it or about to do something unforgettable. She sat across from me in a little glass office, tapped a pen against her notebook, and asked what brought me in. I took a breath, leaned forward, and told her the whole damn thing. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her about the reunion, about the photos, about being cropped out like a bad habit, about the praying hands emoji and the silence, and the way it felt to be ghosted by the people who used to kiss your scraped knees and write your name on Christmas tags. I said I wanted to send a message, not just to them, but to anyone who's ever been politely erased and expected to smile through it. To her credit, she didn't laugh. She leaned back, studied me for a moment, then said, "All right. You want to make them look. Let's do something they can't scroll past." We brainstormed for an hour, throwing around designs and phrases, but the message that stuck, the one that felt like a gut punch and a battle cry at the same time, was the one I'd written on a napkin in bourbon-soaked handwriting just nights before. Some family just doesn't get it, but the world does. It was bitter. It was raw. It was true. We picked the photo together. Two, one from the reunion, one of the originals I'd taken with my own phone before they had a chance to mutilate it. There I was, standing between my cousin Caleb and Aunt Judy, holding a plate of ribs and smiling like a damn fool, not realizing I was already halfway erased in their minds. Maya cropped everyone else out, just leaving me in focus. She slapped the text in bold white over the image, and that was it. A goddamn masterpiece. Then came the hard part, paying for it. The cheapest billboard in town, one near the center of downtown, was $3,000 for a full month. It was ugly, exposed, and located across from a hardware store and a strip club, but you could see it from 3 lanes of traffic and from the diner where half my extended family ate breakfast every Sunday after church. I stared at the quote on the invoice for a full 10 minutes, chewing the inside of my cheek, thinking about what $3,000 meant to someone like me. That was most of my savings. That was next month's rent, and probably the month after that. That was the difference between scraping by and full-on financial freefall. But I also thought about all the years I'd paid in silence, in bending myself into someone they could almost accept, and I realized that kind of debt doesn't come with a receipt, but it still costs you everything. So I handed Maya my card, heart pounding, palms sweating, and said, "Let's light the fuse." And just like that, it was done. The billboard would go up in 72 hours. 72 hours until my face was 30 feet high and impossible to ignore. 72 hours until people from my high school, old neighbors, coworkers, even total strangers, would see my little rebellion blazing above traffic like a war flag. 72 hours until my phone either exploded or went silent forever. I didn't know what I wanted them to feel. Guilt, shame, confusion, fear, but I knew they needed to feel something. Because after a lifetime of being polite, of shrinking and smoothing myself down to fit inside their narrow definition of family, I was done disappearing. The truth is, I wasn't trying to be petty. I was trying to be seen. To say, in the loudest, most undeniable way possible, you don't get to erase me anymore. And, for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not joy, not triumph, but clarity. The fuse was lit, the billboard was coming, and I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. They were going to look. It went live on a Tuesday morning just after sunrise, and by noon, half the town had seen it, including the one person I was hoping would stay quiet the longest. My sister Rachel called me at 12:30 on the day, her voice already cracked with rage before I even managed to say hello. Like she'd been practicing this tirade in the mirror or shouting it at her car dashboard for an hour straight before finally deciding to let me have it directly. She didn't start with pleasantries, no hey or how have you been, just jumped right in like a grenade through my ear. What the actual hell, Dylan? A billboard? Are you serious right now? She snapped, her voice strained like she'd been crying or trying not to. Do you have any idea what kind of storm you've started? I took a breath, one of those deep ones people on yoga apps tell you to take before you say something stupid, and I said calmly, I'm just returning the favor. You all made me invisible, so I made myself seen. Seemed fair. She laughed then, not the kind of laugh that signals amusement, but the one that's sharp enough to cut skin. You embarrassed Mom. You embarrassed all of us. Dad's getting calls from people at church asking what kind of mess you're pulling. What the hell were you thinking, Dylan? I was thinking I'm tired of being erased, I said, keeping my voice flat because the last thing I was going to do was flinch now. I was there, Rachel. I smiled, I hugged, I brought pie, and you all went out of your way to make sure it looked like I never even showed up. And when I asked you why, you left me on read. So, yeah, I made a billboard. You cropped me out. I cropped all of you out. That's the game, isn't it? There was a pause on the other end, that thick silence people use when they're trying to find a way to justify something they know damn well can't be justified. When she finally spoke, her voice had softened, but not in a comforting way. It was that controlled, tight-lipped calm you use when you think someone's lost their mind and you're trying not to provoke them further. "Dylan, nobody cropped you out on purpose," she said, like I was too stupid to recognize the difference between a clumsy photo and a surgical erasure. "You're always doing this. Making something out of nothing. Acting like we're all out to get you when we're just trying to keep the peace." That was the moment the dam in my chest cracked, and everything I'd been holding back for the last decade came flooding out before I could stop it. "Keeping the peace?" I said, voice rising despite myself. "By pretending I don't exist? By acting like your own brother's a stain on the damn family name? You think I started this? You think I'm the problem here? Rachel, I've been quiet for years. I've swallowed your digs, your backhanded compliments, your pity, your pious little smiles. I've sat through grace and barbecues and fake hugs and watched you all pretend I was background noise. You call that peace? That's just silence with a mask on." "I'm not going to fight with you," she said coldly, and I could hear her pulling back, already slipping into that safe, emotional distance she always retreats to when the heat gets too real. "Of course you're not," I said. "Because if you had to actually talk about it, you might have to admit I was right." There was another pause, and then she hung up. Just like that. Call ended. Conversation dead. No resolution, no apology, no acknowledgement, just that old familiar slam of the invisible door between us, one I'd been pressing my face against since we were teenagers, trying to find the warmth on the other side. I sat in my apartment for the rest of that afternoon staring out the window, watching the world go about its business, as if I hadn't just detonated my entire relationship with the only sibling I had. I watched people walk their dogs, sip iced coffees, laugh into their phones, not knowing that just across town, a billboard with my face on it was drawing more side-eye than a drunk uncle at Thanksgiving. By nightfall, I'd gotten 3 texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years. One from an old high school buddy, simple and to the point. "Dude, the billboard. Holy sh, *T, respect." One from a coworker who just wrote, "Saw your face on 3rd Street. Hope you're okay." And one from my ex-girlfriend Jordan, who I hadn't talked to in almost a year. "Wow. You really went there, huh?" I didn't reply to any of them. Not yet. Because despite the flurry of outside attention, the only reactions I really cared about were still locked behind the silence of the people who'd put me in this position to begin with. No call from Mom. No text from Uncle Gary. No email from Aunt Carol. Just silence, heavy and familiar as concrete. And maybe that was the most telling response of all. But it didn't matter. The billboard was up. The message was out. And whether they liked it or not, they were going to have to look at me now. Every Sunday on the way to church, every trip downtown, every time they drove past that intersection, my face would be staring back, asking the question they never wanted to answer. Why did you erase me? Because sometimes the only way to be heard is to speak in the one language people can't ignore, visibility. And I had just become impossible to unsee. It came 2 nights after the billboard went up, tucked between a slew of push notifications and half-hearted apologies from people who didn't actually want to talk about the thing they were apologizing for. My inbox had turned into a strange zoo of reactions, pitying check-ins from coworkers who suddenly remembered my last name, passive-aggressive scripture quotes from church friends of my parents, a long-winded Facebook message from someone I barely knew back in high school saying he respected the boldness, but hoped I'd find healing through Christ, and there, buried between the digital noise, was a subject line that made my stomach drop into my shoes. "From your father." I stared at it for a good 10 minutes before clicking. Not because I didn't want to know what was inside, but because some wounds ache louder when you touch them, and this particular scar had been sealed shut for almost 30 years. My father, Kenneth Ray Shaw, had left when I was 10 years old, back when my sister Rachel still sucked her thumb and Mom pretended everything could be fixed with casseroles and clean laundry. One day he was in the garage trying to fix the lawnmower, and the next morning he was gone, just like that, like a magician walking out of his own disappearing act and never looking back. The only time I ever heard from him after that was a birthday card when I turned 16, no return address, no message, just a folded $20 bill inside and a signature that looked like it was written by someone with their hand shaking. We never spoke. He remarried, had more kids, built a brand new family like the first one never even happened. It was a betrayal so quiet and complete that most days, I wasn't even sure it hurt anymore. I just knew there was a blank space in me where a father was supposed to be. But here he was now, in my inbox, 28 years too late and, apparently, exactly on time. I opened the email. The subject line had been formal, but the message wasn't. It was short, almost clumsy in its honesty, and as I read it, I realized he'd probably typed and deleted it 100 times before finally clicking send. Dylan, it began, no dear, or hey, just my name like a confession. I saw the billboard. Couldn't miss it. I know I don't have the right to comment, but I just wanted to say, it took guts. Not everyone in this world knows how to speak up for themselves, let alone in a way that makes the whole town stop and look. I don't know what happened with the rest of the family, but I do know it's hard as hell to feel erased. I've felt it, too. If you want to talk, I'm around. It was signed simply Dad. No phone number, no dramatic closing line, just an offer like an open door in a house I thought had burned down long ago. I read it 3 times, then closed my laptop and just sat there in the dark, feeling the weight of something I couldn't quite name pressing down on my chest. Because as much as I'd told myself over the years that I didn't care, that his absence was just another part of life to be endured like traffic or taxes, the truth was messier. I did care. Of course I cared. Every kid cares when their father walks out and doesn't look back. Every kid waits, even if they swear they're not, for the day the silence breaks. I didn't respond that night. I didn't sleep much either. The next day, I walked through town like a man wrapped in static. Every glance felt like it lingered too long. Every whisper from across a coffee shop sounded like my name. Every familiar face avoided eye contact just a second too late to pretend it was natural. It was like I'd become infamous in my own backyard, famous not for a crime, but for a rebellion, and nobody quite knew what to do with that. By sunset, I was back in my apartment, pacing in front of my kitchen window, watching cars roll through the intersection below where my billboard stood like a flag planted in enemy territory. And that's when I opened my laptop again and typed back. Dad, I wrote, the words still strange on my fingertips. Thanks for reaching out. I wasn't expecting that. Honestly, I wasn't expecting any of this. But yeah, maybe we should talk. I've got questions. I didn't send it right away. I hovered over the button, thinking about what I was opening myself up to. Not just an awkward conversation with a man who bailed, but the possibility, however slim, that maybe my erasure didn't start with that reunion photo. Maybe it went deeper. Maybe it started long before my aunts and uncles ever decided I didn't belong. I hit send. He replied within an hour with a phone number and a simple line, name the time and place. I'll be there. The next day, I texted him, Friday, 3 o'clock. The old diner off I-70. He wrote back instantly, I'll be there. I sat on that for a while, staring at my phone like it might bite me. This wasn't just a meeting. This was me reaching back into the wreckage and trying to pull out something that had never been finished, never been explained, never been forgiven. And maybe it wouldn't be fixed. Maybe it would only hurt more. But I had to know. Because it wasn't just the reunion photos or the billboard or Rachel's phone call that had shaken me to my core. It was the possibility that I'd been trying to earn love from people who didn't know how to give it for most of my life. And maybe, just maybe, the one man who'd walked away first was the only one willing to face me now. So I circled the date on my calendar and waited. Not for closure. Not for healing. But for the truth, no matter how ugly it was. The diner was exactly how I remembered it from 20 years ago, though everything inside had a slight gray tint now, as if time had dimmed the colors just enough to match the quiet ache in my chest. The same faded booths lined the walls, the same buzzing overhead lights cast their weary glow over plates of greasy bacon and endless refills of bitter coffee, and the same old waitress, Barb, I think her name was, still wore that name tag like it was stitched into her identity. I got there 15 minutes early because I didn't know what kind of man I'd be when I saw him, whether I'd be calm or furious or some strange mixture of both, and I didn't want him to see me sweat if I didn't have to. I sat near the window, ordered a black coffee, and stared through the fogged glass like it held answers I hadn't earned. I kept playing the upcoming conversation over in my head, like a rehearsal for a scene I wasn't sure I could act out without losing it halfway through. What do you say to the man who taught you how to ride a bike and then vanished without saying goodbye? How do you sit across from the person who made you and then decided not to keep you? When he finally walked in, I recognized him instantly, even though 2 decades had reshaped his face into something older, leaner, and more tired. His hair was thinner, his shoulders stooped a little, and there was a tightness around his eyes that looked like it had been carved there by years of unfinished sentences. He looked around the room slowly, then saw me, and our eyes locked for a second too long, just long enough to realize we were both terrified. He walked over, offered a half smile, and said my name like it was both a question and an apology. "Dylan," he said, almost in a whisper. I nodded but didn't stand up. "You made it," I said, keeping my voice flat. He slid into the booth across from me, took off his coat like he wasn't sure he was allowed to stay, and signaled to Barb with a raised hand before speaking again. "Thanks for agreeing to this," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "I wasn't sure either," I said honestly, because there was no point lying anymore. We sat in silence for a beat while Barb came over, set down a second coffee, and gave him the same tired smile she gave everyone. When she walked away, he wrapped his hands around the mug like it might steady him. "I saw the billboard," he said after a while. "It was bold." "Bold wasn't really the goal," I replied. "It was the last option." He nodded, looked down at his coffee, then looked back up. "They did that to you? Cropped you out?" I stared at him for a moment, wondering if he truly didn't know, or if this was part of some soft entry strategy, the kind people use when they want to talk without triggering landmines. "Yeah," I said. "Every single photo. Like I wasn't there. Like I don't count." He exhaled slowly and shook his head. "That's brutal." "I'm sorry, Dylan." "You're not the one who did it," I said, though the words tasted strange. "Not this time." He winced, and for the first time I saw the guilt flicker across his face like a crack in armor. "No," he said quietly. "But I left long before they learned how to erase you." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. That line cut all on its own. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn photo, the edges curled and soft like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. He slid it across the table toward me. It was a picture of me on my 10th birthday, holding a small cake with crooked candles, grinning like a kid who still believed nothing bad could stay for long. My father stood behind me, one hand on my shoulder, and he looked young, strong, like someone who hadn't yet made the worst mistake of his life. "I kept this," he said. "Through everything. New house, new family, job changes, all of it. This was always in my drawer." I picked it up slowly, staring at it like it might dissolve under my fingers. It was the first photo I'd seen in years that didn't try to erase me. "I used to think about writing to you," he said, voice low. "After the divorce, I thought it was better if I just stayed gone. Your mother made it clear that I wasn't wanted around. And I wasn't strong enough to fight for my place." I looked up, met his eyes, and said, "You don't get credit for staying away. You were my dad. You were supposed to fight." He nodded, accepting the blow like he knew it had been coming. "I know," he said. "I regret that every day." Another silence passed, this one heavy but not empty. "You know," I said after a while, "they didn't just erase me from the photos. They've been doing it in smaller ways for years. It just finally went digital." He laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was true in that awful way you can't even deny anymore. "I guess that's why the billboard hit me so hard," he said. "It felt familiar. And for the first time I saw it." He hadn't just left. He'd been pushed out of the story too, rewritten as a villain, a ghost, a mistake. Maybe not without cause, but definitely without context. So what now? I asked, still holding the photo. I don't know, he said. I'm not asking to be your father again. I just want to know you. As a man. Not as the kid I left behind. I nodded slowly, unsure of everything but one thing, that I wanted to keep that photo. Not because it healed anything, but because it proved I'd once had a place, even if it was only for a moment. We sat there until the coffee ran cold, two ghosts sharing a booth, trying to remember how to be people again. When we finally stood to leave, he didn't try to hug me, and I didn't offer my hand. We just looked at each other, two broken things with matching cracks, and I said, maybe this is where the story changes. He smiled, this time with something like hope, and said, maybe it is. And then he left. Not forever this time. Just out the door. But I had a feeling he'd be back. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't dread that possibility. That night, after the diner and after the awkward parting with a man who'd once been a shadow at the edge of my childhood, I found myself staring at the worn photograph he'd given me like it was some sort of holy relic. Proof that I had once existed in a version of the world where I mattered enough to be captured, held, remembered. It was strange, the power a single image could have, how something barely 4 inches across could feel heavier than the concrete weight I'd been dragging through my chest for years. There was something about that old photo, about the way my younger self smiled so easily, unaware of the silence that would eventually grow between us, that made me want to search through the rest of my life for more pieces of that boy. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I dug through my closet, pulled down the old cardboard box that had followed me from apartment to apartment like a dog nobody wanted to take in, and opened it on the living room floor. Inside were the fragments of a past I'd spent more time avoiding than honoring: birthday cards, a few school awards, my high school graduation program, and at the bottom, beneath a layer of dust and dried-up ink pens, the photo albums. I flipped through the first one slowly, as if I were opening a door to a room that had been sealed off for too long. Page after page, there were pictures of Rachel, of our mom in the kitchen wearing her signature red apron, of cousins playing in backyards, of Easter egg hunts and Christmas mornings and summer cookouts, and in nearly every one of them I was missing. Not just in the way a camera sometimes forgets to pan wide enough, but in the kind of deliberate exclusion that makes your stomach turn. I saw the edge of my arm in one, a blur of hair in another, a single shoe near the side of a picnic table, but never my face, never my whole self. It was like someone had been quietly editing me out of my own life, trimming the film reel of our family story so that I existed only in memory and implication, but never in frame. I pulled out another album, this one older, from the 90s. And finally, I saw me. There I was, grinning in front of a Christmas tree with a missing front tooth, wrapped in an oversized scarf on a snowy driveway, blowing out candles while everyone clapped around me. These weren't just images. They were proof. They were reminders that I had once been visible, once been wanted, once been whole. But somewhere around the year 2005, something changed. I didn't just vanish overnight. It was more subtle than that, like I started showing up less and less, until eventually I wasn't there at all. My birthday parties weren't photographed. My school milestones weren't celebrated. The others got documented and scrapbooked, but my teenage years were a blur of blanks. Even the times I knew I was present, the trip to Tennessee in 2007, Thanksgiving in 2009, I was either absent or strategically on the periphery, always on the edge, never in the middle. And suddenly I realized something that hit me harder than the billboard, harder than Rachel's cold phone call, harder even than the years of being ignored. I had let it happen. Somewhere along the way, I'd learned that fading into the background was easier than fighting to be seen. I had become complicit in my own erasure. I didn't smile as much. I didn't push to be included. I took the photos instead of being in them. I skipped events when the tension became too thick to breathe through. I told myself I didn't care, that I was fine, that I preferred the distance, when really I was starving for connection and too damn proud to ask for it. I sat back on the floor, surrounded by scattered memories, and tried to make sense of it all. The rejection hadn't started last week or last year. It had started with 1,000 quiet decisions, most of them mine. And yet, no matter how much I tried to shrink, to smooth my edges, to become palatable to a group of people who only seemed to love the version of me that stayed quiet and agreeable, it had never been enough. So, maybe the billboard hadn't just been a message to them. Maybe it had been for me too. A declaration. A reminder. A warning. You don't get to disappear just because they pretend you're not there. You don't get to fold yourself into silence and then act surprised when nobody listens. If you want to be seen, you have to stand up and demand it. I gathered the albums into a stack, wiped the dust off the covers, and placed them carefully back in the box, not because I wanted to bury them again, but because I needed them to be ready. I had a feeling I'd be revisiting those pages again soon, maybe even with someone else sitting beside me this time. Someone who hadn't been there the first time around. And just as I was closing the lid, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an email address I didn't recognize at first, but the domain caught my attention, indianagazette.com. The subject line was short, direct, and impossible to ignore. Story inquiry, billboard, and family message. I clicked it open, heart thudding like a drum in a locked room, and read the message inside. Hi Dylan, I'm a reporter with the Indiana Gazette. We've received multiple tips about a local billboard featuring a striking message from you to your family. We're interested in hearing your story if you're willing to share. Let me know if you'd like to talk. I sat there frozen, fingers hovering over the keyboard, my mind already spiraling with questions I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. What if I said yes? What if I told the world the full story, the hurt, the erasure, the billboard, the father, the photo albums? Would it help? Would it heal? Or would it just blow everything up even worse? But another thought echoed louder, clearer, impossible to silence now. What if telling the truth, finally, fully, without apology, was the only way to be free? I didn't respond right away. I closed the laptop and leaned back, heart pounding like I'd just escaped something or walked straight into something else entirely. Because whether or not I agreed to that interview, one thing was now painfully clear. This wasn't just my family's story anymore. It was becoming everyone's. The morning the article went live, the town felt quieter than usual, like it had taken a collective breath and was holding it, waiting for something to break. The digital version of the piece had already been shared across every local Facebook group and small-town subreddit you could imagine by the time I even rolled out of bed. The headline was simple, but unmistakable in its implication. Man uses billboard to call out family and starts a bigger conversation about being erased. Beneath it was my name, my photo, and a condensed version of everything I had kept quiet for years, now laid bare for the world to dissect with all the curiosity of strangers who loved a little drama with their morning coffee. It was surreal, reading about myself like I was a character in someone else's novel. They had quoted me from the short interview I eventually gave, carefully, thoughtfully, never trying to burn anyone directly, but also not softening the truth to make it more palatable. I had said things like, you can only be ignored so many times before you have to make noise, and sometimes family doesn't need to be cruel out loud, they just need to pretend you're not really there. It all sounded a little too poetic for how messy it had felt in real time, but the point had landed and people were responding in droves. I didn't expect what came next, not really, even though some part of me had hoped it would happen. My inbox began to flood, not with insults or accusations, which I had braced for, but with stories. Dozens, then hundreds, from people I'd never met, but who all felt strangely familiar now. They told me about the time they weren't invited to their sister's wedding because they were too political, or how they were left out of group texts, ignored at funerals, spoken over at family dinners. They wrote about parents who never said the words, "I'm proud of you," about cousins who blocked them without explanation, about 1,000 small wounds that bled just the same as the big ones. And somewhere in those messages, buried between the confessions and the shared grief, I felt something I hadn't expected: connection. For the first time, I wasn't just some bitter guy with a billboard and a chip on his shoulder. I was a mirror, a signal, a reminder to people who had been fading in their own stories that maybe they weren't alone, and maybe, just maybe, speaking up didn't make them the villain. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. Later that afternoon, I got a message from my mother. Not a call, not a visit, just a single text that read, "You've said enough." That was it. No punctuation, no warmth, no attempt at understanding. Just those 3 words, like a closing statement at the end of a trial I hadn't even realized I was on. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering what it was supposed to mean. Was it disappointment? Anger? An attempt at guilt? Or was it simply her way of telling me I'd broken the family rule, never, under any circumstances, make them look too closely at the cracks? I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I finally understood something that had eluded me for years. Her silence, her avoidance, her refusal to ever acknowledge the absence she'd helped create. It wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about her inability to face the version of her son who refused to keep shrinking just to make the others more comfortable. That evening, I drove downtown. I parked across from the diner, the same place where I'd met my father just a few days earlier. And I stood at the edge of the sidewalk staring up at the billboard as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with that strange orange haze that only small Midwestern towns ever seem to get right. My face stared back at me, serious, tired, defiant, next to those bold, angry words. Some family just doesn't get it, but the world does. For a moment, I wondered if it had been worth it. The money, the fallout, the conversations I'd never get to have now. The silence I'd shattered and replaced with a louder, more public kind of rejection. But then I watched a woman, maybe in her 40s, slow her car as she passed. She didn't look shocked or amused or offended. She looked seen. She gave the sign a quick nod, a gesture so subtle it would have gone unnoticed if I hadn't been watching for it. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't just about me anymore. It had become a symbol, however strange or dramatic or specific, for everyone who had ever been asked to play a background character in their own family story. Sometimes, you don't get the apology. Sometimes, you don't get the conversation. Sometimes, all you get is the silence, the cold shoulder, the ghosting, and the power to respond in whatever way keeps your soul from imploding. For me, it was a billboard. For someone else, it might be a letter or a voicemail they finally send, or just walking away for good and never looking back. I don't know if I'll ever be fully at peace with how things went down. I don't know if my sister will ever forgive me, or if my mother will ever speak to me again. I don't know if my name will become a warning in whispered conversations between cousins, or if one day they'll understand why I did it. But I do know this, there are some things you can't erase. Some faces you can't crop out. And sometimes the only way to be heard is to write your story in letters 30 feet tall and let the world read it for you. So I stood there, just me and the billboard, as the town kept moving around me, cars honking, kids laughing, someone playing country music way too loud in a beat-up pickup. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to notice me. I had made myself undeniable. And whether they liked it or not, the world had looked back.